We're going to take a look at different types of dashboards and reports and how to create a dashboard and or report. And then we're going to take a look at Google Data Studio, and we'll finish off with some resources, a list of resources that I've put together for everyone, just to kind of help you on this journey, and if this is something that you want to explore a little bit more. The other thing too that I'll mention is throughout my presentation, I do have QR codes in the top right-hand corner of some of the slides. So if you do have a tablet or a cell phone device handy, feel free to scan those QR codes, and you just have to open up the camera app on your device, and then it should provide the link right away. You can check out those links that I've provided. Also more than happy to provide a list of the links in the chat afterwards, or it can be an email that's sent out to everyone. So if you do miss the QR codes tonight, don't worry so much, because we can definitely get that information to you. So starting off with, what is data visualization? So data visualization, this is going to be a graphical representation of information and data. So you're going to use visual elements, so things like charts and graphs and maps, to provide a very accessible way that your viewers can understand things like trends and outliers and patterns in that data. And I always like to kind of think about relevant topics and things that are happening around us today. And, the first thing I thought about was, COVID. I think it's impossible to not think about that. But thinking about how powerful using data visualization to analyze the numbers and to understand the data and the information that's coming in, so that, our healthcare workers can make more informed decisions, and our government can make more informed decisions about, how to protect and support everyone here in Canada. So this is a really great example of how data visualization can be used in a very powerful way. And the example that we see here, it was taken, I think, like 2 days ago from the Government of Canada website, really kind of small dashboard put together, but still very impactful and very powerful. So the other thing with data visualization a lot of the time is, why should you care about data visualization? For me, I'm a data viz nerd. So, I get really excited when people were looking at graphs and maps and charts and things like that. But for others, they're kind of like, I can take it or leave it. But when I was in my first year of university, I had a professor who showed me the map that you see on the right hand of the screen here. So this is one of the earliest uses of data visualization to take a look at the 1854 cholera outbreak in London. Jon Snow was the scientist who put this together. And yes, Jon Snow, I know, Game of Thrones, but not the same Jon Snow. And this was extremely pivotal because they were able to pinpoint the wells that were causing people to get very sick and some people to die. And by mapping it and being able to visualize it, they were able to really quickly make those insights and act and make some fast decisions. Whereas if they were to have, just taken a look at a spreadsheet of numbers and names and things, they probably wouldn't be able to discern and make those connections as quickly. So, sometimes it can really be life and death when we're thinking about visualizations and the impact that they can have on decisions that we're making. So the process that I'm going to kind of work through today in our introduction phase is we're going to be talking about questions that we should be asking. We're going to talk a little bit about collection and preparation of data, and then we're going to dive down into visualizing that data. So before you start any project, and this can really be applied to so many things, but I always think it's important to start with some really broad questions. And feel free, I know the presentation is being recorded, but feel free to, jot some of these down or take a screenshot or whatever you want to do to remember this. But starting off with questions like this, like, who is my audience? What do they need to know? What questions might they have? What am I trying to communicate to them? This is really going to help you start to form how you're going to visualize your data. And I always find is what I do for best practices is I'll kind of write down these questions really quickly. I'll kind of jot down some notes under the questions when I start my project, and then I'll kind of reevaluate it as I work through my visualization process. Because your audience might change throughout the process. As you start to look at the data and the research, some new ideas and information might come forward that might change the way you want to visualize your data. But I always start off with these kind of very general, widespread questions. And then with moving into collecting and preparing the data. So my example here comes from Mount Royal Library, but I'm sure at UC and other institutions, you will also have a data librarian. But our librarian at Mount Royal, his name is Brian Jackson, and he has done an amazing job of putting together a list of different resources that can get you started with finding data. And that's what the QR code is going to link you to is his guide there. And there's also lots of different examples that I've provided on this slide. I'm not going to go through each individual one, but feel free to kind of, again, jot some down or write some down if you want to look into them a little bit more. But this is a really good place to start when you are looking at collecting your data. Also, with the data librarians that you have access to on your campuses, they're going to be able to answer questions around how to prepare your data. You might find that some of the data sets that you're collecting aren't exactly in the format or the way that you want them, or maybe there's certain information that you're missing, or maybe you need to even like blend two data sets together. They're going to be able to help you answer those questions. So this is a really, really good place to start. Doing simple Google searches also okay to start off with, but I find sometimes, you might get some data that isn't always as reliable is starting off with these more academic options. So I would recommend, starting off here when you are looking to start collecting and preparing your data, taking a look at these resources, and then reaching out to your data librarian on your campuses. Now, before we can really start to fully visualize our data, the hardest part is always going to be selecting the right chart or graph or visualization to use. This is something that I myself still struggle with on a day-to-day basis. It's like, do I use this bar graph or do I use this one, or should I change it like this, or should I present it this way? And this is something that I think, in general, it does take time to kind of build up the skills to really quickly be able to do this. But this is a really great graphic just to kind of get you started with thinking about, which chart should I use when I'm trying to answer what question. So the way that I kind of work through this is I'll take a look and I'll think, what questions am I trying to ask and answer for my viewers? The next thing I'll take a look at is what data do I actually have collected and what are the properties of that data? And then finally, I'll take a look at and think about, what am I trying to communicate? What insights am I trying to communicate to my audience or my viewers with the data? And as I mentioned, this graphic, this is really great, kind of walks you through, if you're going to be taking a look at comparative, you can kind of follow that diagram and it's going to lead you to a good option of a chart. So this is one example. Here's another example, a little bit more simplified to kind of work through that process. But again, these are really great places to kind of get you started. And you'll notice too the QR code here. I believe this takes you to a Tableau resource around selecting the right chart. Again, it's a white paper, really, really good information. Highly recommend taking a look at that and reading through just to get a little bit more information on that. So once you're able to kind of figure out, what chart is it that I'm trying to use to visualize my data, we're going to talk a little bit about charts. And we're really just going to focus on kind of the basics today. I'm not going to go into too much detail because I think at this point, most of you probably already know and recognize most of these charts. But things that I'm just going to be pointing out, I've noted some tips in all of these slides. So really helpful when we're thinking about when we're designing our graphs, and things to kind of keep in mind. So starting off with bar charts, this is probably one of the most common visualizations that you come across on a day-to-day basis. And this is going to be comparing metrics. It's going to be using either vertical or horizontal bars. And you're able to also compare different categories. And with bar charts, you want to make sure that you're using a reasonable number of data points. So, if you have thousands of data points, using a bar chart probably not going to be the best example. Thousands of different categories. A bar chart is probably not going to be the best example to use. Next, maps. So again, this is kind of my forte, I would say. I feel very comfortable working in this area. So maps, first and foremost, they are really great at evaluating and looking at data across geographic areas. So one thing to kind of keep in mind, if you are planning on utilizing a map, you do need to have some sort of geographic information such as latitude and longitude or a postal code. So important to kind of keep that in mind when you are searching for data to use for your visualizations, that you need to make sure you have the right data collected. Next, so bullet charts. These are really great when you're specifically looking at targets or benchmarks. They're always measured horizontally, and they're really great at providing gauge-like graphics. So things like if you're trying to monitor the health or performance KPIs, this is going to be the chart that you probably want to use. Next, scatter charts. So these are going to take a look at correlation or lack of correlation between your data points. So really, this is going to be focusing in on relationships. And you can also add in things like a trend line, and this is going to show correlations or lack of correlations in your data. Pie charts. Okay, so pie charts, probably my least favorite data visualization, and mostly just because people typically tend to use these wrong. So, be wary when using a pie chart. So pie charts, these are going to be comparing parts of a whole. And as I said in my tips, use cautiously. So make sure that if you're using, first of all, more than one pie chart, that you indicate that the size of the pie chart might be different. So you're looking at different data sets. The other thing too is when you are using a pie chart, if you have multiple slivers, like let's say you have 15 different slivers, I can't say it, slivers, that's going to be really difficult for someone to quickly glance and then be able to understand that data right away and understand what you're trying to communicate or visualize. So really when if you are going to be using a pie chart, make sure you're really only taking a look at 2 or 3 different values in that pie chart. Scorecards, these are really popular in dashboards. Typically, you'll see them at the top of a dashboard. And these are going to be showing a total single metric. And typically, it's going to be highlighting a really critical metric in your visualization. So they can also be used to compare metrics from a previous time period. And sometimes you'll see this, they'll have like a little red arrow or a green arrow if it's increased or decreased. Line charts, so again, very common. They're going to be tracking trends over time. So it can depict a relationship between 2 or more variables as well. And you can also use area charts, but again, be wary with area charts. Sometimes less is more. And then finally, kind of diving down a little bit more into chart design. So a lot of the time when you're using a specific data viz software, it is going to typically give you the option to provide things like a title and subtitle, labels. You're going to be able to label your X and Y, and you're also going to be able to, provide a legend and provide source information. But make sure you always fill out those sections. A lot of the time, people forget to do things like add labels or provide a title or provide a legend title, or even forget to source the data that where you're getting it from. And this can make it very, very difficult for a viewer because, if they're just looking at a graph, but there's no context, it's really hard to understand what information you're trying to provide. So do keep in mind when you are creating any type of chart or map or graph that you make sure that you have designed it appropriately. So now we are going to dive down a little bit deeper into dashboards. And dashboards is a term that a lot of data visualization softwares like Tableau and Power BI use. And essentially it is going to be a group of lots of different individual data visualization or related data visualizations. And when they're brought together, it's going to kind of tell a story. And in Google Data Studio, they don't use the term dashboards, they use the term reports, but it's one and the same. So when we are designing dashboards, I like to follow these 3 steps. So the first one is when we are planning our dashboards. First of all, I really like to start off by getting inspired. And what I mean by that is, I'll do things like I'll go onto Google and type in like top 10 dashboards of 2020. Again, I mentioned I'm a data viz nerd. This is what I do in my spare time. But it's a really good way to kind of get you started and start to see kind of what other people are doing in this area and give you ideas of, different templates or how you might visualize your data. Other things that you can do, like even going on Pinterest and typing in data visualizations, there's some really cool artistic examples that will come up, and it'll really kind of get you starting to think about how exactly you want your dashboard to look like. The next thing is really know your audience. So who is this message for? Who is this data visualization or dashboard for and intended for? Knowing your audience is extremely, extremely important, because if you're providing information, but your audience doesn't relate to it or doesn't understand the background behind it, then it's not going to work. So you really need to make sure you know your audience. Next, selecting your software. So for some people, they might know straight away what software they want to use to achieve this. And maybe they have experience, like I said, using tools like Tableau or using tools like Power BI. And we're going to kind of look at this a little bit more in just a second, but I always say use a tool that you feel comfortable using. Some tools have all kind of like the bells and whistles, and that's really great. But if you don't know how to use it effectively, then don't go in that direction. Use something that you feel comfortable using. And then finally, selecting the right charts and graphs and visuals in your dashboard. And we kind of talked about that a little bit just before this section. So next, moving into the design of our dashboard, and kind of one thing I always like to mention too in the planning stage is get a piece of paper and a pen or a pencil and sketch it out before you actually start putting things within the software system. Like, get a really rough sketch prototype of what you're trying to achieve with your dashboard. I always find this is really helpful because when I start diving down into the software, sometimes I get a little bit, my mind will drift and I'm like, wow, look at all these different charts that it can do. And then I start adding all these different charts, and by the end I have like 20 charts on my page, and it's just super cluttered and hard to read. So really having that strong plan moving into the design phase is going to be essential. So when you're designing your dashboard, you really want to make sure that you start off with that high level view, and you're going to progressively zoom in. And what I mean by that is put the most important information at the top. The other thing too, so when you know who your audience is. So for example, in most Western countries, we typically will read left to right. You want to make sure that you follow that type of progression. And I think there might have been a question because I heard, sorry, I'm just escaping. Oh, no, no question. Okay, we're good. I'm gonna go back here. Yes, as I was saying, moving left to right, just because that's typically how we process our information, that's going to be important to take into consideration. Next, use color strategically. And I have a whole other slide on color because color is so important and really important that we think about it strategically. I think this is something that always gets overlooked, especially when you're using default colors in programs. And I'm going to talk about that in just a second. This is like a point for me that really bothers me. Next, using size to denote importance of things, right? So if you're using a scorecard and it's dead center and it's quite large, like we know that that's going to draw people's attention to it right away. So it's important to consider things like that. The other thing too, so for example, with Google Data Studio, with your report, you can have multiple pages within a report. What I always recommend is with the pages, you might want to limit those to 3 or 4. Once you get into having like 10, 15 different pages, you're going to lose your audience and their interest level. So think about, the number of pages, the number of charts, and the number of colors that you're using. You want people to understand the message that you're trying to portray right away. It shouldn't have to take lots and lots of explanation for your viewer to kind of understand the point that you're trying to draw home. And then finally, and this is really kind of like the big thing with data visualization software, is adding interactivity. And this is really going to encourage your viewer to explore your data and dive down a little or drill down into your data more. And it's really going to help kind of tell that story. And once you are done with your design phase, or should I say your first design phase, you're going to want to share your dashboard or your report with someone that you feel comfortable with. Maybe not someone in your group, maybe someone outside of your group, but someone who is going to be able to provide feedback. So doing that user testing is going to be very critical. I find too, whenever I'm working on a project, and even outside of data visualization, because I've only looked at it and I've been looking at it for the past 2 weeks, I think it's amazing. And then I'll send it, to my colleague Janesta, and she'll be like, Anna, no, like you need to change all of these things, or this is too cluttered. So it's really, really important to get feedback from someone that you feel comfortable with, and someone who, or even a group of people that are going to be able to provide that information to you. And then finally, eliminating clutter. I think it's very easy to kind of, as I mentioned, put like 20 different graphs on a page because you think all of that information is super important and relevant to the viewer, but less is more. Always remember that less is more. If you can't tell your story in that like one glance, that quick view, you need to think about eliminating some of your graphs or charts or text or things like that. So we're going to talk a little bit more about software now. So one thing I'll say is, so today we're focusing on Google Data Studio, but there are tons of different data visualization software products available. And my recommendation, at least when I'm trying to select a software or considering a software to use, I always like to keep in mind the following points. So first of all, cost, especially if you are a student, know that cost is everything. Always look for free options. And that's why I love Google Data Studio, because it is free. And I know Tableau also has a free version for students. Very, very important because these products can be extremely expensive. And that's something that obviously not always an option for us as students or in education. Next, considering the ease of use. So, if you're learning a new software and, you know, you've been playing around with it for a few days and you've done lots of different tutorials and you've done, you know, you've watched YouTube videos and things like that, and you're still not getting it, maybe consider switching to something that's a little bit more simplified, something that's a little bit easier for you to use. And there's nothing wrong with that. You know, I find that I prefer, for example, Tableau over Power BI. Power BI for me just does not sink in. So I think that's really important when you are selecting a software. And then finally, I always like to take a look to see what kind of support is available for that software. So things like taking a look at the user community, what type of user community is there connected to that software. You know, you can find user communities. Sometimes they're typically like built right into the software, especially if it's a web-based software. But sometimes, you know, you can find like Reddit groups or Discord channel or things like that that are really helpful. Other things to consider, do you have experts that you can reach out to in this area that feel really comfortable? So for example, you know, if you have questions about Google Data Studio, you can reach out to me. I wouldn't say I'm necessarily an expert, but, you know, I'm there to help. Or if you have questions about Tableau, you know, you can reach out to John, who's going to be presenting next week. And then finally, templates. So templates for me, they're my best friend. They always get me started when I'm working on a project, just because it's, you know, it's a good kind of place to, you know, work from. So I know with things like for me with Google Data Studio, there's templates available. So that's really helpful when I'm getting started. But as you can see, lots of different software to choose from. There's going to be software that some of you have probably already used before, and then some new ones. You know, on here had D3JS, Google Sheets, Plotly, ArcGIS, Power BI, Tableau. The list goes on and on. Do a quick Google search if you want to learn more. But today we are going to be focusing on Google Data Studio. Okay, color, here we go. So, color. When we are designing our dashboards, there's a few things to think about. And I'm actually going to start with the tips at the bottom. And I know this is a very text-heavy slide, and I apologize for that. But there was just so much that I needed to say about color. So first of all, when you are creating your dashboard or report, make sure that you are branding that report. And what I mean by that is use consistent colors throughout the report so that people know it's related. You know, you want to be using a similar template or theme throughout. You don't want to be using different types of text or, you know, just things like that that make it very confusing and kind of discombobulated. Next, using things like transparency to create a visual hierarchy in your information is going to be really useful. Using things like saturation to draw attention towards a certain number or visualization. And then finally, also don't rely on color, because the thing is, with a lot of visualizations, you don't typically know 100% if your viewers, they might be colorblind, there might be certain colors that they're unable to see. So you do want to make sure that you're using other elements in your tool bag to get your information across. And, you know, that might be using text or a hyperlink or providing the proper labels. Things like that are going to be really important. I've also provided, just so everyone is aware, with the QR code at the top of this slide. This takes you to a website that's called Color Brewer, and it helps you to create different color schemes for your visualizations. I love it. I use it all the time, but you know, you might already have a color palette or scheme that you're comfortable with using and you're going to use moving forward. So talking about color schemes. So first of all, qualitative color schemes. So this is going to be encoding values of categorical data with color. So it's going to be contrasting colors that are used for each category. Typically, the default, you all know that Google default when you're making a pie chart and you know you have like the full color wheel. But maybe consider branding it and keeping it something consistent to the branding that you're trying to keep throughout your report instead of using those default colors. Sequential color scheme, so this is going to be an increasing intensity or saturation of color, and this is typically the darker the color, the larger the value, and it's going to be measuring continuous data. And then finally, divergent color schemes. So typically this is going to be data that has positive and negative values, and it's going to be highlighting the deviation from a central value that typically is going to be a very neutral color. You know, a lot of the time we see it as like green and red. And then finally, for Google Data Studio, it does use hex. If you are familiar with CSS or HTML, color scales, it's going to be the exact same. Basically, it's going to be a 6 value number. With hex, just make sure that, for example, if you are using Color Brewer, that you do switch it to give you hex numbers instead of like RGB. And so Google Data Studio, the first thing that we are going to do today, so again, I have that QR code, but just doing a simple search on Google, type in Google Data Studio, I think the first or the second result will be the website you are looking for. The first one sometimes is an ad, but make sure you go to Google Data Studio and try logging on. So the thing with Google Data Studio, if you're a Mount Royal student, you can use your MT Royal account. Any Gmail account, you can log into it. So with Google Data Studio, there's really 3 main components within Google Data Studio. The first one is connecting your data, and we're going to go into more detail on that in just a minute. There's lots of different ways and lots of different types of data sets that you can connect into Google Data Studio. I believe there's like 88 different data sets or connectors that you can use, so lots of different options. Visualizing your data. So this is going to be when you're creating your dashboard or report. And this is when you're going to be, you know, adding in your different graphs and charts, different text, hyperlinks. You can embed websites, you can embed videos, lots of different options for visualizing your information. And then finally, sharing your report. So important, because what good is creating a report if we can't share it with people? With sharing as well, there's really another reason why I love Google Data Studio. Here's my other plug for Google Data Studio is the collaboration features for Google Data Studio are fantastic. It works very similar if you're familiar with Google products. Their collaboration features are fantastic. You just basically can send out an email to people in your group, add them as an editor, and then everyone is able to work on the same report simultaneously. And it's amazing. I love that. Like back in my day when you had a Word document, you had to send it back like 30 times and you would lose track of revisions. And it's just like a nightmare. It's like PTSD for me. So the sharing and collaborating features with Google Data Studio, wonderful. Then, you know, before we get into the software itself, I just want to, again, provide like a cool tip, because that's what I like to do. And when you are learning a new software, these are kind of the steps or the processes I like to take. The first thing is exploring the tool's interface. So, you know, just kind of get comfortable with like clicking on buttons, hovering your mouse or on things, just really kind of getting comfortable with all of the different options that you have within the tool. Once you've kind of had an opportunity to take a look at the interface, I recommend taking a look at different tutorials that are available. And with Google Data Studio, there's built-in tutorials, and there's also an online course that you can take. As I mentioned, it takes about 40 minutes to do. And this is really going to walk you through step by step on how to use this software. And it's going to make you feel a lot more confident. And then finally, start by creating your own report or dashboard. And this report or dashboard does not have to be related to the project that you're working on. It can just be for fun. And I mean, like a lot of you are probably like, okay, I don't really want to create a dashboard for fun, but trust me, this is going to help you. And you can even like do something silly like you are taking a look at like different Netflix data or things like that of your favorite TV shows. But just create a dashboard and get kind of familiar again with the interface, get familiar with how to chart, how to add a filter to your data, things like that. So those would be my recommendations kind of anytime you're learning a new software. So going back to Google Data Studio, we're going to take a look at the homepage. And some of you have probably, as I was talking and rambling on, some of you have already probably been clicking on things and exploring and are probably already experts in Google Data Studio at this point. But I just want to draw your attention to a few things here on our homepage. So right here at the top, you'll see that when I hover my mouse over the Google Data Studio icon, if I click on that icon, that is always going to take us back to the home page. So kind of keep that in mind as you're working away through different templates and reports and tutorials and things like that. If you ever need to get back to the home page, you just need to click on this Google Data Studio icon on the top left-hand corner. Now, below the Google Data Studio logo here at the top, you're going to see the button here that says Create with the Google Plus logo. When we click on that, you'll see that 3 options are provided. So you can either create a report, you can add a data source, or you can go into Explore, which is a beta feature at this point. And I wouldn't recommend using this at this point. There's still some bugs that need to be worked out with the Explorer, but basically with the Explorer, it's an opportunity for you to view other reports and dashboards that people have created, and they're giving you permission to go ahead and use those dashboards, reports, and data as kind of like a starting place. So you can click on it, you can check it out, but I will say it's a little bit buggy at this point. So you're mainly going to be focusing on creating a report or adding your data sources. Underneath Create, you'll see the Recent button here. This is just going to be able to give you kind of a snapshot of any recent reports that you have created. You'll see on my screen, I have a list of all these different reports that I've created. A lot of them, it's just me like playing around with things. But this is going to give you your full list of any report that either you own or someone has shared with you. You also have the ability to see, when it was last opened, and you can also see who the owner of that report is. And when you hover on these reports and we click on the 3 dots here, you'll see when this appears, we do have the ability to share that report with someone. We can rename a report and we can remove or delete a report. Now, under Recent here, next we have, focusing on the left-hand side of the screen, we have Shared with Me. So this is going to be able to filter all reports that have been shared with me. So for example, if you're working on a report or a dashboard as a group and someone has shared that with you, by selecting that, it's going to automatically filter and show you those reports. You'll be able to filter by reports that are owned by you, and you'll also be able to check out your trash can if you did accidentally delete something that you didn't want to delete. Now focusing kind of on the center of our screen at the top, you'll see we have the Reports button, Data Sources, and Explorer. This is exactly the same as selecting the Create button. Okay, so do keep that in mind, whether you select a report, data source, or Explorer from here, or you select it from the Create, you're going to get to it the same way. So as I mentioned before, kind of the first step with Google Data Studio is you want to add your data to create a report. So if I go to Create and I select Data Source, it's going to take us to this page. And first of all, when you are adding a data source, you want to make sure that you give it a title. So if I was going to do something like test, and then here are all your data connectors. So as I mentioned, I believe there's about 88 different data connectors that you can connect data sets from. As I kind of scroll down here, you'll see like there's just so many options. I would say the ones that you're probably going to be using the most, and I'm assuming here, so I could be wrong, but connecting things like Google Sheets. So if you are from Mount Royal, you're a Google institution, a lot of the time we do use Google Sheets. It's basically the Google version of Microsoft Excel. And then also the file upload here. So if you have a .csv file, which typically you would create if you were using Excel, and exporting it, that would come from the file upload option here. So this is where you're going to connect your data from. Now I'm going to go back here just for a moment, and I just want to quickly take a look at a data source that is just going to be one that is a sample data source. So when I click on a sample report here, you're going to see this is the view that you would get as if you were a viewer taking a look at the dashboard. Now, if I wanted to make an edit, or if I wanted to change something in this dashboard, all I need to do, and it kind of walks you through the steps at the top here. So it says sample report, make a copy to edit. So if I want to make a copy, I'm going to select the copy icon in the top right-hand corner. We're going to get this pop-up appear, and it's going to say select a data source that you want to be added to the new report, and it automatically is going to link to that sample data set that you see in this dashboard. So I'm going to go ahead and say copy report. It's just going to take a moment because my internet is very slow. And now we are in our editor view with Google Data Studio. First time coming in here, you know, if this is your first kind of exposure to Google Data Studio, you're gonna be like, wow, there's lots of different things to take a look at and explore, which is really exciting. But I'm gonna walk you kind of through the basic overview of the interface. And then I'm going to share with you the different tutorials and that online course that I want everyone to work through. And you know, it doesn't have to be tonight. If you're kind of like, I am done for the night, that's okay. If you want to do it over the next couple of days, recommend, but do it when it's kind of fresh in your mind. So first things first, with any report here at the top, you want to make sure that you are giving your report a name. Don't leave it as untitled. Make sure that you're naming it something appropriate, because we're just kind of like showing general overview. I'm just going to type in test report 2021. Under test report, you'll see when we select file, we get a few options here. So we have the ability to share our report from the file menu. We can also make a copy of this report. We can also download our report as a PDF, and we can embed our report into a web page. You can also go ahead and see version history, and this is going to be really important, especially if you're collaborating on a report with a group, so that, like, let's say someone in your group made some edits and you're kind of like, when were these edits made? I don't recognize this information. You can go ahead and just click on see version history, and you can kind of see who went in, made what changes, and when. Next to file, edit, again, pretty straightforward. This is something that we see on so many different software sources, but here you have the ability to undo something. So let's say you changed the color of a graph and you were like, ooh, no, I don't like that. You can just simply click undo. It'll take you back to what you had before. You're able to cut and paste within your worksheet, and you can select all, you know, those kind of basics, delete items. Next with view, so this is going to be, you know, how you are viewing your information when you're editing your report. So right now we have our grid turned on just to make sure that everything's kind of level. You can change your grid size, you can change the grid padding, the horizontal offset, things like that. You can also refresh your data, and where that's going to come in handy is if you've connected a data set that is constantly being updated or live updated, you have the ability to update that data set and keep it connected to your dashboard, so it's always giving you the newest and most relevant data. So Tableau also has this type of feature, but that is going to be very important if you are using data that is constantly changing and adding new information. So next to view, we have our insert, and where we see insert, it's going to give us all of the different types of charts that we can insert. Underneath the charts, it's going to give you all of the different controls. We're going to talk about those in a little bit. And then it's also going to give us the option if you want to embed a website. If you want to add in a text box, you can put different images. So maybe you have like a company logo or something that you want to put on your dashboard. You can add images. You can add different kind of circles and rectangles and things like that. So just to kind of customize your dashboard. Next, you'll see page. So as I mentioned with Google Data Studio, you can have multiple pages within a report. So you can do things like duplicate a page, you can create a new page, but you do have the option to create multiple pages. And again, as I said, kind of keep it to a minimum. You don't want to have like 15 pages in your report. Try to keep it nice, clean, and concise. Next, we have a range. Again, this is going to be how our charts and our different visual elements are arranged within our report. If you have a chart selected, you will be able to, they'll be highlighted so you can select them in the toolbar. Next to that, resources. So again, this is just so we can kind of dive down into our data a little bit more. It's going to pop it up at the bottom here. So if I first of all select manage data sources, our data set is going to pop up here at the bottom. You'll see different things. So it's going to tell you the number of reports that are using this data set. It's going to say, you know, the status of your data set. Is it currently working, or is there a bug that maybe needs to be fixed? You can edit the data set from here. You can do a duplication, or you can delete it. And you can also add multiple data sets. So in a report, you do not have to use just one data set. You can have multiple data sets in a report. You know, those data sets can be used individually to show different charts and graphs, or you can blend them together to try and tell a story. So just again, it depends on the data that you've collected in your report. And then to close that, you're just going to select close on the right-hand side. And then next to resource is help. And this is going to probably be your best friend. And this is, I know this is definitely my best friend when I'm using a new piece of software. But when we click help, you'll see lots of different options pop up here. So first of all, help. It's going to give us a search box here where we can go in and search a term. So maybe we're confused about like what is blended data. So I go here, and then it's going to give me links to different Google pages where it talks about blended data or adding blended data into our report. And again, if you want to get rid of the help box, clicking the X there, going back, you'll see there's a community forum. As I mentioned before, with software, community forums, super, super helpful. So if there's, you know, something that doesn't quite seem to be working, or maybe you have a bug somewhere, you can report that in the community forum, and you know, you can get information from other users. Different information release notes. You can request features because it's an evolving and relatively new software. If there's something that they're currently not providing, you can request Google to add it for you. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to add it or add it anytime soon, but really, really helpful that, you know, they're looking for feedback from their users. Different tutorials that you can watch. As I mentioned, these are really, really important when you're learning a new software. Like, take advantage of these built-in features. Watch some of these tutorials to kind of help you learn and become more comfortable with the tool. And then, you know, legal help page. Now, after each of these options, you'll see you also have the ability, and these are going to be kind of like quick links for your report. So you can add a page by simply selecting add page. When you hover your mouse over there, you'll be able to navigate to your different pages. You can remove, if you accidentally added a page, you can just go ahead and remove that if you don't want to use it. So I'm going to get rid of that page here. And this is kind of how you can navigate to your different pages in your report. You have the undo and the redo buttons here. So as I mentioned, if you made a mistake, you can quickly kind of fix that, go back to the previous iteration. If you need to go back to your selection mode, you have your cursor there. Adding data, you can select add data. It's going to pop up this page here that we saw before about connecting data. So we can go ahead, select a connector that we want to use, and then input the data that we want to include into our dashboard. After adding data, you'll see add a chart. This is going to give us our drop down of all of the different charts and graphs that they have available and built into Google Data Studio. So as you can see, I said last time I counted, I believe there's about 33 options for different charts that you can add, but lots of different options here that you can select to visualize your data. Next to add a chart, as I mentioned, community visualizations and components. So these are going to be things that different developers have added and suggested and are saying that you can use in your chart if you want. So you can kind of explore different community visualizations if there is a chart that isn't currently provided in the add chart drop-down list. Next, controls. So these are going to be ways that viewers can interact with your data. There's different types of filters, different ways that you can change things like the date range of the data that you're looking at. And I'm going to have a slide on this, so we're going to go into a little bit more detail into what each of these controls do. But know that this is going to be how you allow your viewer to interact with the data in your dashboard. And then finally, kind of next to that, we have the ability to, as we saw before, embed things like a URL. We can put images and text boxes and lines and different shapes in our dashboards to kind of help our viewers follow along in our dashboard. And then when we move over to the far right, the first thing that we're going to see is the theme and the layout. So remember I talked about this before, about making sure that you're using a consistent theme throughout all of your report pages. And one really great thing is, with Google Data Studio, they do provide different default themes that you can use. So if you're kind of like, I want to use something that's really quick and easy and straightforward, you can take a look and search through these. So maybe there's a particular color scheme that you're quite fond of, you can select that. But you can also customize your own theme. So if we go into customize here, you'll see that you can change everything, from the type of text that you're using to the different color palettes that you want to use. So just kind of keep that in mind, as you do have that customization available to you. And then next to theme, we have layout. So this is going to be your dashboard layout. You have the ability to do things like change your canvas size. So again, this kind of goes into those first steps of like, what questions are you trying to answer, and like, who's your audience? Is your audience going to be looking at this dashboard on their cell phone, or are they going to be looking at it from a web page? This is really important to consider, because this is going to severely impact how you want your dashboard to look and to be styled. So do kind of keep that in mind, like cell phone versus web page is super, super important to think about. And then we're going to now kind of go up to the top of the page here. So you'll see you also have the ability to share and collaborate on your dashboard by selecting the share button here. If we click the drop down arrow, you'll see you have the ability to invite people. So for me, I can type in an email address and they're automatically going to auto-populate. So I have Janesta, my colleague here. I have the ability to change what they are allowed to do. So for example, if you're working on this dashboard with a group, You are probably going to want to give other group members the ability to edit that dashboard, but maybe you're only looking for someone to use or test your dashboard. You probably are only going to want them to view the dashboard. So do kind of keep that in mind. When you are sharing out your dashboard, especially when you're more in like the design phase, about limiting, who can edit versus who can view. Well, if we go back to the drop down here, you can also schedule an email delivery when you're sharing. So let's say you're working on something and you're like, oh, I'd really like my boss to see this, but not right now. Maybe on like Monday when I've done a little bit more work. You can pre-schedule that delivery, which is really great because for some of us like me, like sometimes I can completely lose track of time. So scheduling something does really keep you accountable. You can get a report link. So if you don't want to invite people through here, you can send them a link that auto-generates. You can embed the report into a web page, as I mentioned before, or you can download it as a PDF. Now, if you want to, like right now we're in our editing page, but if you want to take a look at the report as if you were the viewer or the audience, you're going to select the view button here. It's going to take us to the view of the web page. You'll see different features, kind of like if we scroll up and down, if I hover my mouse over certain elements of the map, it's going to give me a drill down in the numbers here, same as if I hover it over our line graph, our bar charts. So just kind of explore the graphs this way as well. You want to view them as the editor, but you also want to view your dashboard as the viewer. When you're ready and you see something, you're like, oh, I need to change that, you just go back into the editor. And then you're able to make any changes. Now, one thing I do want to kind of point out, and you're going to see when you kind of work through your tutorials, but when you're ready to edit a chart, if we select our chart, you're going to see some elements appear. So when we have the data tab selected, you're going to see, first of all, the data source that's connected to that map or that visualization. So you're going to know exactly where it's pulling that data from. And then it breaks down your data into metrics and dimensions. And I have a slide on that. We're going to look at that in a little bit more detail in just a minute. But it's really, really great because it's also going to show you all of the different available fields from your data set that you can pull information from. Lots of different other things that you can kind of play around with in here. You can add filters. And as I mentioned, we're going to talk about that in just a moment here, but do kind of explore these features. You can also play around with the style of your map or your data visualization. So when we click on style on the right-hand tab, you'll see you have the option to kind of take a look at the colors that are being used. If you're using a legend, as I mentioned before, make sure you use that legend. The text that you're using, different background colors, headers, things like that. So do kind of take a look at all of these features. Now, I'm going to go back into my slides. So, Google Data Studio fields. We took a look at these just a moment ago when we selected the map. And as I mentioned, it's going to be broken down into dimensions and metrics. So dimensions, these are things that are going to contain a measure or ways to categorize your data. So for example, in this example that you see on the right-hand side here, an item name and color, these are an example of a dimension, okay? Now metrics are going to be numbers that measure the things you contained in your dimensions. So again, in this example here, quantity sold is going to be a metric. Parameters are also used in Google Data Studio. So this is going to be kind of how you filter your data. Now, we talked about this really briefly, controls. So this is how your viewers can interact with your data. And as I mentioned, really text heavy slide. I'm not going to read through every single piece of text on this slide, but do take a look at this in a little bit more detail following this presentation, because it's going to help you immensely. But with controls, as I mentioned, these are going to let viewers interact and customize the data that's being displayed in your report. They can do things like filter the data by specific dimension value. They can set a time frame of the report. So maybe they're looking at COVID data and they're interested on, what the case numbers looked like on December 5th to the 25th. They can filter the report to only show them that data and that information. Viewers can also set parameter values that can be used in calculated fields or passed back into the connector. And they can also change the underlying data set or the data source that's being used. This is something you're probably not going to be using in your reports or dashboards for this project, but just keep in mind that you do have these options available to you. Oh, didn't mean to do that. So here we go. We are going to practice. Just going to take a look. So we have about half an hour left. And what I'm going to recommend is I'm going to kind of finish up talking, and then it's kind of your choice. If you want to use the next half an hour, I can answer questions, or you can kind of work away on some of the different tutorials and or the course, or just creating your own report from scratch with the time that we have left. You can do this after the session tonight as well, or tomorrow, or on the weekend if you're really keen. But as I mentioned before, reach out to me if you do have questions after going through these and you're still confused about something. So here's my recommendations. I would start off by working through the tutorial report that's provided in the homepage, and I'm going to show you in just a moment which one I'm referring to and how to get to that. Once you've done the tutorial report, I recommend doing the Data Studio Academy course. As I mentioned, it takes about 40 minutes to an hour to work through. The link is provided here on the page. I also have a QR code for it on the next page that I'm going to show you. And then finally, create your own report from scratch. So, find a spreadsheet of data that you have handy, upload it into the connector, and then start creating a report that you can play around with the different elements. And it doesn't have to be something that's refined and looks really great. It's more just to kind of get an understanding for how to really work with the interface in Google Data Studio. So with this page, as I mentioned, the QR code is going to take you to that Academy course. So you can scan that, and that's going to take you through that course. You can sign up and get going on that if you wish. My email address is available on this page, so anuhn@mtroyal.ca. Please feel free to reach out and send me an email, ask questions. With Google Data Studio, if you're looking for questions, check out that help center, that help forum. Those are going to be really good places to start. Take that Academy course. And then kind of going back to what we talked about a little bit earlier in the session around finding data, check out your library search. Check out your librarians, ask them questions. If you have a data librarian available to you, send them an email. They're there to help you, and they're more than happy to help you. So use those resources that you have available to you. Now, I'm going to go ahead and show you how to get started with that template. And then, as I mentioned, we're going to kind of open it up for questions. Now I'm like, where am I? Okay, so I'm going to go home. So you'll see kind of start with the template here. And I also want to mention there is a template gallery that you can explore. So when we talked about that before, about getting inspiration, again, this is going to be a good place to start. It's going to kind of give you a snapshot of the top 10. You can click on see more. It's going to take you to other examples that you can use to kind of get you started. But next to blank report, you are going to select the tutorial report, okay? This is the tutorial report for Data Studio, and it is going to walk you through about, I think, 20 different steps of how to kind of learn the interface in Google Data Studio. And it basically uses these little sticky notes. You're going to follow the clue or the instructions on the sticky notes, and it's going to walk you through the process of kind of editing and looking at your first report in Google Data Studio.